Get out and stop pretending you understand any of this, janitor. Professor Victoria Sterling pointed directly at the heavy oak door, her finger slicing through the air like a scalpel. The 38-year-old woman, the reigning queen of the mathematics department at Summit Ridge University in Seattle, had just humiliated Marcus Thorne in front of 30 graduate students, treating him like a stain beneath her designer heels. Marcus's dark hands froze on the handle of his gray utility cart. 30 pairs of eyes burned into his broad back as the students giggled, delighted by this unexpected bit of midday entertainment. Victoria stood beside the chalkboard, which was covered in a thicket of complex equations, her framed doctorates from Princeton and Oxford glittering on the wall behind her like trophies of war. But instead of retreating into the hallway, Marcus turned. He was a tall black man with a quiet intensity, and he stepped closer to the mathematical proof she was presenting. His deep brown eyes swept across the elegant white symbols with a focus that made Victoria's confident smirk flicker for a split second. "Professor?" Marcus said softly, his baritone voice cutting through the silence. "There is an error in your third line. You missed the negative sign in the exponent." The room erupted with stunned whispers. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Victoria Sterling, who had built a career on the belief that she was infallible, stood frozen like a statue. What happens when the person you look down on the most sees something you completely missed? If you enjoy dramatic reversals of fortune, don't forget to follow along so you won't miss the fallout. And ask yourself, how will Victoria react when a black janitor points out a fundamental mistake in her lecture right in the middle of class? Let's find out what happens next. The humiliation echoed through the rain-slicked campus of Summit Ridge University like a thunderclap. Within hours, the rumor spread like wildfire. The janitor had dared to challenge Professor Victoria Sterling, the rising star of the mathematics department, the pride of the Pacific Northwest. In Victoria's corner office, where floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooked the Space Needle and lawns manicured like a royal garden, students dressed in Patagonia vests and designer sneakers chatted about cryptography and game theory over $12 artisanal coffees. The four walls around her displayed degrees and awards, like a shrine honoring intellectual supremacy. At faculty galas, she raised glasses of vintage Pinot Noir that cost a month's rent for some people, engaging in academic debates with field medal winners. Victoria was the embodiment of the academic elite, and she behaved as if she were entitled to it by divine right. On the other side of that world, Marcus Thorne began his shift just as the gray Seattle clouds turned to twilight. His battered cleaning cart rolled through silent after-hours hallways, restrooms, classrooms, and laboratories. 3 buildings, 8 hours of work, emptying trash, mopping floors, restocking paper towels, sanitizing desks. But during the rare minutes he could rest, Marcus opened advanced mathematics books he had carefully hidden among the maintenance manuals. His locker held 2 contradictory worlds: industrial cleaning chemicals and notebooks filled edge to edge with complicated mathematical proofs, stained with coffee drips from studying in a rush during graveyard shifts. The hierarchy on this campus was as clear as the glass walls of the tech center. Students paid $68,000 a year for the privilege of calling themselves Summit Ridge alumni. Professors lived in ivory towers, where intellect was measured in grants and citations, and support staff like Marcus were invisible ghosts. Silent gears kept the academic paradise running without anyone bothering to look their way. To Victoria, that hierarchy was simply the natural order. Intelligence, she believed, only flourished in prestigious families, expensive prep schools, and elite social circles. She dated Dr. Julian Pierce of Stanford as living proof of that belief, a way to reinforce the class she considered herself part of. When she saw maintenance staff enter a classroom, she didn't even bother to look up. In Victoria's eyes, they lacked the capacity for meaningful conversation, let alone any understanding of non-Euclidean geometry. And yet, even as she basked in the perfection of her world, a world built from pride and privilege, the first cracks had already begun to form. She didn't yet know that the black man pushing the cleaning cart was about to shatter the entire illusion she had believed in her whole life. Marcus Thorne had not always been the man working night shifts behind a cleaning cart. 10 years ago, he had been a promising doctoral student at MIT, pursuing mathematical problems that only a handful of people in the world could comprehend. His professors all said Marcus's future was blindingly bright, that he would become one of the great mathematicians of his generation. Then he met Elena. She was a jazz pianist playing at the lounge where he often studied until midnight. Elena had a laugh that made him forget algorithms and warm brown eyes, that convinced him life still had room for magic. They fell in love fast, intensely, the kind of love that burns bright and consumes everything. At 23, all passion and naive hope, they didn't protect themselves. When Elena became pregnant, Marcus didn't hesitate. He took a leave of absence to prepare for fatherhood. They rented a small apartment in Roxbury and planned a simple wedding after the baby arrived. Maya Thorne came into the world on a rainy November night. She was perfect, tiny, with her father's nose and a spark of cleverness that Marcus recognized instantly. He held his daughter in his arms and felt the universe shift around him. 3 months later, their world collapsed. Congenital heart defect, Dr. Sarah Chen said, her voice gentle but unable to hide the severity. Maya has a ventricular septal defect. She needs surgery as soon as possible. Estimated cost, $10,000. Insurance covered only part of it. They still had to shoulder more than $130,000 out of pocket. Marcus started taking on every job he could find, tutoring calculus, working warehouse shifts, accepting any task as long as it paid. Elena worked 2, sometimes 3 gigs a day playing and teaching piano. But the medical bills arrived faster than they could earn money. Debt piled up like a boulder, crushing their chests. The stress began tearing their relationship apart. Elena barely slept, haunted by every wheezing breath Maya took. Marcus struggled to juggle independent research and endless labor. They argued about money, about the future, about choices neither of them had the strength to make anymore. Then one morning Marcus woke to find a piece of paper on the kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. I love Maya, but I'm drowning. I wish I could endure it, but I can't. Please don't look for me. Elena." The closet was empty. The joint bank account was wiped clean, and Marcus, 24 years old, not yet graduated, holding a black baby girl with a heart defect, was left alone. The decision came quickly and brutally. Marcus couldn't continue his PhD program when his daughter needed him every minute. He couldn't do 80 hours of research a week while Maya needed care. He withdrew from MIT, set aside his dream of becoming a professor, and moved to Seattle to take a janitorial job at Summit Ridge University. The night shift, steady pay, and most importantly, union-backed health insurance. That was 10 years ago. Now, Maya was 9, a bright, clever girl with braids who loved puzzles just like her father. She had already undergone 2 surgeries, but soon she would need the biggest, riskiest, most expensive one. Estimated cost, $350,000. Every night, after tucking Maya into bed in their small apartment in the Rainier Valley, Marcus put on his gray uniform and went to work. He mopped silent hallways, emptied trash in offices still glowing with lamplight, and during tiny pockets of rest, he opened math books, because no matter how much life had stolen from him, it couldn't steal his passion. Mathematics ran in Marcus's veins. It wasn't something he chose, it was something he was. And tonight, when he stepped into Professor Victoria Sterling's lecture hall to do his job, Marcus couldn't stop his eyes from drifting to the chalkboard, couldn't help noticing the mistake in the proof, couldn't stop himself from speaking up. Because to Marcus, mathematics was always the truth, even when that truth got him humiliated in front of 30 students. The whispers about the incident in the lecture hall spread across Summit Ridge like a contagion. But what kept Victoria Sterling awake at night wasn't the humiliation. It was the factual accuracy. That janitor, the black man she had looked down on, had been right. Completely right. She spent 20 minutes checking the equation again, and ultimately had no choice but to accept her own miscalculation. It haunted her. How could a maintenance worker see something an Oxford-trained professor had missed? The Newton Gala competition was approaching, the most prestigious mathematical event of the Pacific Northwest. The prize, $60,000 and automatic admission into the PhD program of any participating university. Math departments worldwide treated the competition as a measure of academic prestige and a tool for recruiting prodigies. Victoria was head of the judging committee. For 15 years, her reputation had been built on her ability to recognize true genius, her never-wrong judgment. This year, she anticipated her greatest triumph yet. 12 candidates, all Stanford, Berkeley, and Summit Ridge graduate students. Names born from the elite education she trusted absolutely. 3 days after the incident, Victoria stood before a packed auditorium to announce the Newton Gala registration list. Her voice was full of confidence as she described the rigor of the competition. "This competition represents the pinnacle of mathematical achievement," she declared. $60,000 and automatic PhD admission await those who truly possess intellectual depth. A Berkeley graduate student raised his hand. "Professor Sterling, can all university employees participate as well?" Victoria's smile curved upward with condescension. "Technically, yes. But advanced mathematics requires many years of formal training. We don't want anyone embarrassing themselves in public. I'm told whom." She glanced across the room, deliberately locating Marcus near the back exit, momentarily pausing his cleaning duties to listen. The message could not have been clearer. To demonstrate the minimum difficulty level, Victoria stepped to the chalkboard and wrote an analytic integral. It looked simple, but solving it correctly required high-level technique. "Anyone who cannot solve this," she said, "probably should not waste our time with the real competition." Students bent over their papers, using a variety of complex methods. Within minutes, most had arrived at the numerical answer. Victoria nodded with approval. "Excellent. This is the baseline mathematical level we expect." She was reaching for the eraser when a deep, calm voice cut through the room, clear enough to interrupt the shared satisfaction. "Professor Sterling, there is a more elegant approach using symmetry." The room fell dead silent. 30 heads turned in unison toward the maintenance worker who had dared interrupt the lecture again. Victoria froze, her hands suspended over the eraser, her practiced smile tightening as she turned to face the challenge to her authority. "Oh, really?" She emphasized each word. "Then enlighten us." Marcus stepped forward, wearing his plain gray uniform. Yet his confidence made several graduate students hold their breath. He picked up the chalk. His strokes were sharp, crisp, astonishingly professional. Instead of the long, cumbersome methods the students used, Marcus applied a clever substitution based on symmetry in the trigonometric functions. "By noticing this integral has mirror symmetry," he explained, "we can transform it into a much simpler form. Same answer, but half the effort." His method was beautiful, clean, refined, so much so that the graduate students leaned forward instinctively. Even Victoria had to silently admit that his approach was truly impressive. But the moment Marcus set the chalk down, scattered applause broke out. Victoria extinguished it with a glare sharp as a blade. The rivalry inside her ignited fiercely. in a moment of arrogance and recklessness, an explosive mix of embarrassment and something she couldn't yet name. Victoria strode to the chalkboard, dragged the chalk hard across the surface, and wrote a complex differential equation taken directly from her own research. "Very well," she said, turning to face the breathless auditorium, her voice echoing off the walls. "If you think you have such mathematical talent—" She paused for a beat, then said clearly, "Solve this, and I'll marry you." An awkward ripple of laughter swept across the room. The joke was clearly meant to humiliate, but beneath the mockery was a real challenge, a battle for dominance. Marcus looked at the problem for 30 seconds, seconds that felt like an entire lifetime. Then he began to write. What happens when arrogance meets the one opponent truly worthy of it? The differential equation Victoria had written stared back at her from the chalkboard like an accusation. She had written it in a moment of impulse, a humiliating blow she believed Marcus Thorne would never be able to touch. This was graduate-level mathematics, the kind she herself had needed weeks to solve during her doctoral research. The auditorium sank into tense silence as Marcus approached the board. The chalk in his dark hand moved with methodical precision, each stroke decisive, unexpectedly confident. Victoria stood watching, waiting anxiously for him to stumble, for some tiny sign that would validate everything she'd always believed, that only the formally trained could understand mathematics of this magnitude. But that moment never came. Marcus analyzed the problem step by step, identified the type of equation, chose the correct mathematical tools, and then applied them with the mastery of someone who saw the structure from the inside, not someone who had merely memorized techniques. In just 5 minutes, he presented the complete solution. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face as she checked each step he had written. Every line was correct. Every transformation aligned perfectly with the results from her own research. "Professor Sterling," Marcus set the chalk down, his voice gentle as a thin blade. "The solution is complete. Would you like me to verify the boundary conditions as well?" The room erupted in shocked whispers. Students pulled out their phones. They knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. News hit social media instantly. A janitor just solved a research-level problem in front of the brightest talents from Stanford. Victoria forced her shoulders straight. "A lucky guess," she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "One problem doesn't prove mathematical maturity. Anyone can memorize a technique without understanding the theory." But her dismissal sounded like hollow metal striking a brick wall. The elegance in Marcus's method refuted her instantly. From the back row, Dr. Elias Vance of Caltech stood up. He had witnessed many geniuses in his life, and something in Marcus's approach felt deeply familiar. "Very impressive," he said, walking towards the front. "Your method was both rigorous and insightful." Victoria's jaw tightened. Having another professor praise Marcus felt like a direct threat to the career she had spent years constructing. "Since you're so confident, Mr. Victoria asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thorne. Marcus Thorne." "Mr. Thorne," Victoria announced, each word sharp and cold. "I formally invite you to participate in the Newton Gala Challenge. But when you fail publicly, remember that I tried to spare you the embarrassment." The gauntlet had been thrown. Academic pride versus working-class resolve. The entire mathematics community was holding its breath. The next morning, registration opened. Unlike usual, Victoria personally supervised the preliminary screening round. She had to ensure Marcus would be eliminated immediately. 3 problems, each one harder than the last, designed by Victoria herself. Problems requiring years of formal training just to approach. 12 candidates filled the conference room. 11 were graduate students from Stanford, Berkeley, and UW, each carrying a flawless pedigree. The 12th, Marcus Thorne, still in his maintenance uniform, looked as out of place as a wrong note in a chamber orchestra. Jared Lawson from Stanford cracked his knuckles smugly. Chloe West, Victoria's star student, reviewed her notes one last time. Miles Corbin from Yale adjusted his designer glasses with reflexive arrogance. "You have 90 minutes," Victoria announced. "Solve all 3. Problem 1. Find the maximum of a constrained function." The graduate students plunged into pages of lengthy calculations. Marcus didn't. He visualized the geometry, saw the intersection point of 2 curves, and solved it cleanly with a single stroke. Problem 2. Analyze a special matrix. The others drowned in systems of equations. Marcus simply examined the matrix structure, recognized the pattern, and wrote the answer. Problem 3. A famous historical problem involving an infinite series. The candidates used modern, convoluted methods. Marcus solved it using Euler's classical style, true to the spirit of the competition. "Time," Victoria said, though the sharpness in her voice had vanished. When the solutions were reviewed, one truth made Victoria turn pale. Marcus's answers were not only correct, they were more elegant, more refined, more insightful. Dr. Vance examined his work with growing fascination. Marcus's style felt familiar. His reasoning, the flow of his proofs, the tools he selected, all reminded him of someone he once knew. "All candidates pass," Victoria announced reluctantly. "The official competition begins tomorrow." But the real battle had already begun inside Victoria's mind. Her worldview was cracking under the weight of reality. How could someone without formal training demonstrate mastery like this? That night, Victoria sat alone in her office, searching for information on Marcus Thorne. No academic records under that name in the last decade, no research publications, no trace of formal training. The emptiness made her frustration intermingle with a feeling she refused to name. Curiosity. Online, the hashtag #JanitorGenius began to go viral. Math departments everywhere were arguing fiercely. Can true genius appear outside the system? Her boyfriend, Dr. Julian Pierce, called, his voice dripping with dismissive contempt. "Victoria, you can't seriously respect that janitor. It's embarrassing." But Victoria couldn't shake the image of Marcus. Steady hand with the chalk, razor-sharp mind, quiet confidence. For the first time in her career, she wondered, did intelligence truly follow the path she had always believed? Now it was no longer just a matter of academic pride. It reached into Victoria Sterling's reputation, her beliefs, and the very core of her academic identity. How far was she willing to go to defend everything she thought she knew about genius? The small apartment in Rainier Valley was silent, except for the steady breathing of Maya. Marcus sat beside his daughter's bed, the streetlights filtering through the thin curtains and casting pale yellow streaks across the wall. Maya looked tiny beneath the thick blanket, strands of braided hair falling gently over a pillow whose floral pattern had long faded. In her arms, the old stuffed rabbit held tight like a protective charm. "Daddy?" Maya asked in a sleepy voice, thin as a breath. "Is the competition tomorrow?" "Important." Marcus gently brushed her hair. "Very important, sweetheart. Because it's to fix my heart, right?" Marcus's chest tightened. 9 years old. She was only 9, yet she knew far too much about hospital bills, surgeries, and the fact that her father worked 2 shifts a day just to keep her alive. "That's right, honey," he said. "But it's more than that. It's to prove that dreams don't disappear. Sometimes they just fall asleep for a little while, like the princess in the forest." Exactly like that. Maya was quiet for a moment before asking, "You're going to win, right?" Marcus didn't lie to his daughter. "I will do my very best. That's all any of us can do." When Maya was fully asleep, Marcus returned to the tiny kitchen table. Around him, medical bills were stacked like silent accusations. Dr. Chen had been clear. Maya needed surgery within 6 months. Her heart was growing, but so was the defect. $350,000. The number repeated in his mind like a death sentence. $60,000 from the Newton Gala wouldn't be enough. But it was a beginning. More importantly, winning would open a door he thought had closed forever. A PhD scholarship, a researcher's salary, a future where Maya could finally have what she deserved. His phone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number. Withdraw from the competition. You don't belong there. A concerned friend. This wasn't the first message. All week, anonymous emails had come in. Sometimes threatening, sometimes mocking, sometimes pretending to be concerned. All of them wanted him back in his lane. But Marcus couldn't. Not when his daughter slept in the next room, her fragile heart fighting each beat to keep her alive. He opened his worn-out notebook, the last one he kept from his days at MIT. The final pages were still filled with unfinished equations, chalk-like marks he had made 10 years ago when he'd been on the verge of a breakthrough in quantum topology. Just a little further. Then Elena left, and that dream died. Or maybe it only slept, like the princess in the story Maya had just mentioned. Marcus checked the time. 11:45 p.m. He had to be at work at 6 in the morning, but before that, he had to prepare. Victoria Sterling was not his only adversary. The entire academic system, the ivory towers, the prestigious degrees, the invisible walls, had been built to keep people like him outside. No credentials, no connections, no reputation, only raw intellect and the desperation of a black father trying to keep his daughter alive. But mathematics didn't care about degrees. It cared only about truth. And Marcus Thorne, janitor, single father, former doctoral student, knew truth when he saw it. Tomorrow he would remind the world of that. The main auditorium vibrated with a kind of charged excitement, like electricity running through every row. 800 seats were packed with students, faculty, and curious onlookers who had come solely to witness the story that had swept across campus. A janitor daring to challenge the royalty of academia. Global live-stream viewership surpassed 30,000 within minutes as rumors about the undocumented challenger spilled into international mathematics communities. Victoria stood at the podium, immaculate in her tailored charcoal suit, radiating the confidence of someone who had always believed she held absolute authority. As department chair and head of the judging panel, this was her territory, her rules. A perfect chance to restore the natural order after the week's unwelcome disruptions. "Welcome to the Newton Gala Challenge," she declared, her voice echoing off polished wooden walls. "Today we honor pure mathematical excellence. True mathematical maturity comes from years of rigorous training and proper preparation." As her gaze swept across the contestants, it lingered on Marcus, longer than politeness allowed. The implication was clearer than any spoken words. You do not belong here. The competition's format was brutal, yet elegant. 3 rounds eliminating contestants step by step from 12 to 6, 6 to 3, and finally one crowned champion. Victoria had deliberately designed the rounds to favor formal education, requirements only well-trained PhD candidates could master. The judges were introduced: Stanford, Berkeley, Caltech. Dr. Vance offered a polite nod, though his eyes held a trace of concern he couldn't hide. Then came the contestant introductions. Stanford, Yale, MIT, Berkeley, and finally, Marcus Thorne, University Maintenance Staff. The auditorium fell into an awkward silence. A few scattered laughs broke out, small but sharp as needles. Victoria smiled with satisfaction. The contrast was perfect for her intent. Round 1's elimination problem appeared. Prove that the sum of the first n odd numbers is always a perfect square. So simple, it was almost insulting. Exactly the bait Victoria wanted. Designed so the legitimate candidates could shine effortlessly. Whiteboards filled quickly with symbols, formulas, and formal proofs. Mechanical, textbook, predictable. But Marcus was different. He didn't write formulas. He drew patterns of squares built from small dots growing from 1 to 3, then 5, then 7. Each layer of odd numbers formed a larger square. "Look," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice strangely calm. "Mathematics isn't just formulas. It's how we see the hidden structure beneath." The entire auditorium leaned toward his board. No one needed a PhD to understand what he was showing. Dr. Vance leaned forward, almost smiling. "Brilliant," he whispered. "This is mathematical intuition." The live stream exploded. I understood math for the first time. Pure genius. Why didn't we learn it this way? Victoria's lips tightened. Control was slipping from her grasp. Results. All contestants advanced to round 2, but the auditorium had clearly shifted toward Marcus, a turn Victoria had not anticipated. Janitor Genius began climbing the trending charts. During the break, social media erupted. Academic debate split into 2 factions: natural talent versus credentialed power. University trustees arrived to witness the phenomenon now going global. Victoria's boyfriend from Stanford, Dr. Julian Pierce, even flew in, dismissing it as Victoria's little circus. Major news networks began setting up cameras. Media outlets sensed a deeper cultural story, a clash between the elite and the invisible. Evelyn Frost, a tech billionaire and the program's primary donor, sat in the VIP row, her eyes sharp as a blade. She wasn't just observing, she was evaluating. Meanwhile, Dr. Vance pulled Victoria aside. "Victoria, your format seems harsh. Are you sure this is an appropriate difficulty level?" "We maintain the highest standards," Victoria replied, her voice so defensive it almost sounded artificial. But Vance had seen something, and it troubled him. That night, Marcus sat in the quiet apartment, Maya already asleep. In front of him were advanced textbooks he'd borrowed from the library, pages dense with the language of another world. But gradually, connections began to emerge. The advanced concepts reminded him of the simple ideas he had once mastered at MIT, like realizing that a castle is built from the same bricks as a small house. His phone buzzed. A message from Chloe West. "Mr. Thorne, your proof taught me more than 3 years of graduate study. You see connections we completely miss. Good luck tomorrow." Then another from Jared Lawson. "You made all of us see math differently. Not formulas, meaning." But support wasn't the only thing coming. So was backlash. The academic elite mocked him, questioning whether he truly deserved to participate. Julian Pierce wrote an op-ed that went viral. "This is a spectacle that undermines the standards of higher education." Victoria subtly amplified these sentiments with statements sweet as honey, but exclusionary at their core. The next morning, Marcus arrived early. He worked his usual janitorial shift from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and had only 2 hours to rest before the semifinals. His uniform still smelled of cleaning solution when he stepped onto the stage-lit auditorium. Victoria noticed, and she didn't miss her chance. "Perhaps manual labor isn't compatible with serious academic activity," she said loudly enough for the cameras to capture. A cold strike, and worse, it carried a sliver of truth. Marcus was fighting a battle his competitors, propped up by privilege and networks, could never understand. The day of the semifinals arrived, and the auditorium hummed with a predictive buzz. 6 contestants took their positions as the problem appeared on the giant screen, a string of technical symbols that, to most ordinary viewers, looked like an alien language. Determine the convergence properties of this infinite series and analyze its behavior. For anyone outside the world of mathematics, the problem was nearly inaccessible. But Marcus saw straight through the intimidating terminology and recognized the core question. Does the series stabilize or spiral out of control? While the other contestants mechanically applied memorized formulas, Marcus did something entirely different. He used intuition to grasp the essence of the problem, then sketched simple graphs modeling how the series behaved, sometimes approaching a stable value, sometimes growing wildly without end. "Imagine it like a bouncing ball," Marcus explained, his voice calm and clear. "Sometimes each bounce gets smaller until it stops. Sometimes the bounces get bigger, more chaotic, and never end. Mathematics tells us which kind this ball is." His explanation made a graduate-level topic suddenly clear to the audience. The hall erupted in applause. Dr. Vance rose to his feet, clapping openly, his eyes alight as if he had just discovered a gem. "Extraordinary," he said loudly, addressing the panel. "This is understanding at its deepest level. He's not just solving the problem, he's revealing the beauty beneath the complex theory." Even Victoria couldn't deny this was not luck, not a coincidence. This was genuine intellect operating at the highest level. When the results were announced, the three finalists were Chloe West, Victoria's star student, Jared Lawson representing Stanford, and Marcus Thorne, the janitor. Global viewership peaked at 85,000. Math institutes across the world began to wonder, are all our old assumptions about intelligence and education beginning to crack? That night, Victoria shut her office door and began assembling the final round problem. She did not choose randomly. She chose the exact problem from her PhD dissertation, a problem she herself had spent 3 years solving, equipped with full resources, advisors, and endless time. If anything could expose the limits of a self-taught mind, of an uncredentialed genius, it was this. Sitting alone in her dark office, Victoria stared out the window at the Puget Sound. Seattle's lights flickered like stars that had fallen to earth in the rain. Her reputation, her faith in the proper educational system, the entire identity she had built through her career, all hung by a fragile thread over tomorrow. Part of her wanted Marcus to fail, needed him to fail to restore the old world view she had believed was unshakable. But a tiny part of her, very tiny, whispered, "What if I've been wrong all along?" Victoria's phone buzzed. A message from Julian Pierce. "Tomorrow this joke ends, then we go back to normal." "Dinner?" Victoria stared at the screen. Normal? Was that really what she wanted? A world where value was measured by pedigree? Where people like Marcus were forever relegated to jobs that never revealed their true intellect? She didn't reply to Julian. Instead, she opened the file containing the semi-final solutions. Marcus's work filled the screen. Subtle reasoning, elegant structure, mathematical lines that looked almost alive with deep intuition. For the first time in many years, Victoria Sterling felt something she thought had long died. Doubt in herself. She leaned back in her chair, gazing at the city through the office glass. Seattle, glittering, proud, had once symbolized everything she believed in: system, hierarchy, structure, order. But here in this very place, a black man with no degree, no privilege, no institutional backing was shaking the entire mathematical world. And in the darkness of her office, Victoria admitted a bitter truth. Tomorrow, no matter who wins, her world would never be the same again. The morning of the final arrived with an energy unlike anything before. News crews had set up cameras all over the auditorium. Online viewership had swelled past 120,000 people worldwide, all waiting to witness the ultimate showdown between genius and prejudice. In the front row, Evelyn Frost sat among board members and the press. Representatives from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN were present, ready to report on what had become a national conversation about class, race, education, and opportunity. Victoria stepped onto the stage with an almost unnatural confidence, her tailored suit immaculate, her face radiating an air of absolute control. She had spent the entire night crafting what she believed to be the perfect trap. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice booming across the packed auditorium. "Today's final challenge represents the highest standard of mathematical excellence. With the unprecedented international attention this competition has received, I will be applying what I call the Stirling Standard, the most rigorous test of mathematical maturity ever administered." Dr. Vance shifted uncomfortably in his judge's seat. Something in Victoria's tone told him this was no longer about academic evaluation. It smelled personal. Instead of a single problem, Victoria unveiled a ruthless three-part challenge designed to crush any hope Marcus might have left. 1. Solve a graduate-level problem in 90 minutes. 2. Present the solution before a panel of expert mathematicians. 3. Defend the approach against aggressive questioning from specialists. This format will distinguish true mathematical maturity from well-intentioned guesswork, Victoria concluded, her eyes locking on to Marcus, one of the final 3 contestants. The real betrayal appeared when the problem flashed onto the giant screen. Marcus's blood froze as he realized what Victoria had done. This wasn't simply a difficult problem. It was the topic of her doctoral dissertation, a problem she herself needed 3 years to solve, backed by unlimited resources and a team of expert advisors. The technical language on the screen looked alien and frightening to most of the audience, but the mathematicians in the room immediately recognized the impossibility of what Victoria had set up. This problem demanded deep knowledge from multiple branches of graduate-level mathematics, knowledge that typically required years of formal study. Chloe and Jared exchanged knowing looks. As graduate students within Victoria's academic orbit, they had encountered variations of the problem in her advanced seminars. They had years of coursework behind them and direct exposure to the methods Victoria had published in her research. Marcus, however, had 90 minutes to solve something Victoria took 3 years to conquer. Dissatisfied murmurs spread across the auditorium as the mathematics community collectively recognized the rigged game unfolding before them. The live stream chat exploded with outrage. Viewers worldwide realized they were witnessing academic sabotage in real time. Dr. Vance shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "Victoria, a problem of this complexity is entirely inappropriate for a public mathematics competition." "Excellence requires the highest standards," Victoria replied coldly, her voice slicing through the suddenly hushed auditorium. "We cannot lower expectations simply because some contestants lack proper preparation." Her eyes locked onto Marcus again as she delivered the final psychological blow. "You have 90 minutes to prove you belong in serious mathematics. Anyone unable to demonstrate true mathematical sophistication should consider withdrawing with dignity rather than prolonging this painful display." The countdown clock began its merciless descent. Marcus stared at the impossible problem, fully aware that Victoria had pushed the competition into territory where his self-taught background simply couldn't keep up. The first 30 minutes were pure agony. While his competitors had already filled their boards with layers of equations and refined symbols, Marcus was still struggling to find a single foothold, a way to even enter the maze Victoria had constructed. The mathematics at this level required layers of knowledge he had simply never been formally taught. His whiteboard remained nearly empty. Only a few tentative beginnings crossed out. Each one a half-formed attempt leading straight into a dead end. Victoria provided a steady stream of commentary for the live stream audience, her voice dripping with the satisfaction of being vindicated. "We are witnessing the fundamental difference between formal mathematical education and well-meaning enthusiasm. Advanced problems like this require a systematic knowledge base built over many years of serious study. At the 45-minute mark, cameras zoomed in on Marcus's face. Desperation had set in. He started down multiple approaches, erased them, then tried again. Each failure didn't only smear the whiteboard, it deepened the realization for everyone watching that he was fighting almost entirely blind. Meanwhile, Chloe and Jared progressed steadily along the solution path Victoria expected. Their formal training provided a detailed map through the theoretical wilderness that Marcus was stumbling through in the dark. Comments poured rapidly into the live stream chat. "He's completely lost. This is painful to watch." Sterling was right. Proper training matters. The janitor finally hit his limit. Academic Twitter erupted with vindicated reactions from Sterling supporters. The narrative swiftly shifted from outsider shaking the system to amateur exposed by real academic rigor. Everything Victoria had predicted appeared to be unfolding perfectly before hundreds of thousands of witnesses. At the 60-minute mark, disaster struck. Marcus made a critical error in his third attempt. He applied a theorem incorrectly, one he had only ever half understood from hurried readings. The mistake spread like a virus through his argument, collapsing the entire structure he had tried to build. Marcus stood frozen, chalk trembling in his hand, staring at the mocking lines of equations revealing the gaps he couldn't hide. For the first time since this saga began, Marcus Thorne looked like a man truly broken. Victoria's voice cut through the quiet, sharp as a blade honed for maximum damage. "Perhaps we should allow struggling contestants to withdraw with dignity rather than prolong this painful display. Some challenges simply exceed the limits of non-traditional preparation." The suggestion fell with the weight of a hammer blow. Cameras zoomed in on Marcus's face, capturing the exact moment his once steady confidence fractured into doubt and shame. That image would be replayed millions of times. The moment a supposed genius collided with an unbreakable wall called institutional knowledge. At the 75-minute mark, Marcus set the chalk down and closed his eyes. The entire auditorium held its breath. He looked like a man ready to accept defeat in silence, acknowledging that raw talent had finally met a boundary it could not cross. A victorious smile crept across Victoria's face. She believed she had finally proven the truth she had clung to for years, that formal education and proper training were the only paths to true excellence. Just then, Dr. Vance shot up from the judge's seat, unable to stay silent for even one more second. "Before we continue," Vance said, his voice rising with an authority that made the entire auditorium hold its breath. "Let us remember this. The greatest discoveries in the history of mathematics came from those who dared to walk paths the world had never imagined." Her words cut through the fog of doubt surrounding Marcus. A memory resurfaced. An old seminar with Vance back at MIT, a classical method considered outdated by the modern world, yet powerful in its simplicity. Marcus opened his eyes. A spark flickered in his mind. 15 minutes left. Not enough for the ordinary, but enough for the unexpected. Marcus wiped the board clean and started over. He did not go down the deep technical route that Victoria wanted. He returned to the classical foundations of mathematical analysis, something many had dismissed long ago. A Stanford professor whispered, "What on earth is he doing?" But slowly, a path emerged on the whiteboard. Not modern machinery, not high-end theory, but variational methods, minimizing energy, the way water naturally seeks a downhill path. 10 minutes left. Marcus assembled each piece, guided by instincts honed from years of self-study. Vance suddenly stood again, eyes shining. He recognized what he was seeing. This style, it came from a classical genius he had studied for years. Time expired. Marcus stepped back. His solution was complete, so elegant that Victoria went silent. The presentations began. Chloe and Jared spoke cleanly, correctly, in the precise academic style Victoria had trained them in. Everything was proper, but nothing remarkable. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stepped to the board, his voice calm and resonant. The more complex a problem is, the more it must be viewed with simplicity. I approached it by asking the most basic question: which configuration minimizes the energy? From there, I used classical variational methods. He didn't finish. Victoria leaped to her feet, her voice sharp as a blade slicing the air. "Mr. Thorne, this problem requires non-linear operator theory. Classical variational methods cannot handle the domain's lack of compactness. Do you even understand Sobolev embedding?" She turned to the judges, radiating authority. "This is precisely why serious mathematics requires formal training. You cannot use 18th century tools to solve a 21st century problem." The room murmured. A few professors nodded, swayed by her derision. Marcus didn't flinch. He turned to the board and added one more line. "Professor Sterling, I handled the compactness issue using the Poincaré inequality combined with the direct energy estimate. Please look at lines 7 through 12. He pointed to the board, still steady. "As for Sobolev embedding, I don't need it. I work directly with the energy functional rather than detouring through abstract function spaces. The path is different, but the mathematics remains rigorous." Victoria's face flushed. Her voice trembled, though she tried to maintain the upper hand. "You ignored regularity theory. How can you prove the solution is smooth enough to satisfy the boundary conditions?" Julian Pierce, her boyfriend, stood abruptly in the VIP row, cutting in. "Exactly. This is a serious gap. Victoria, you should demand—" "Dr." Vance's voice cracked across the room, icy and immediate. "Dr. Pierce, sit down. This is a competition for the contestants, not a stage for outsiders." Silence froze the auditorium. He turned to Victoria, stern. "Victoria, allow Mr. Thorne to finish. If there is a gap, we will see it when we verify." Then he faced Marcus again. "Mr. Thorne, please explain the regularity issue." Marcus nodded and continued writing. "I don't need the level of regularity the professor demands, because this energy minimization problem is convex. You can see that in line 4. He pointed to the Hessian matrix. "With convexity, a weak solution automatically becomes a classical solution per Weyl's theorem. I cited it in line 15. Then he turned back to Victoria, meeting her eyes. "Professor Sterling, you assumed this was a highly non-linear problem, but viewed through minimization, that non-linearity disappears. That is why classical methods remain effective." In the audience, an MIT professor whispered, "Good Lord, he's right. The problem really is convex." Another nodded. "Sterling used a cannon to shoot a mosquito." Victoria tried one last lifeline. "But references. You cannot invent a method without grounding it in existing research. Did you read Evans? Gilbarg Trudinger?" Marcus gave her a small, gentle smile, the first hint of emotion he'd shown. "I read both. And I also read Euler and Lagrange. They solved similar problems using similar principles." He paused, his voice deepening. "Mathematics doesn't care about trends. It cares about truth. And sometimes the truth is simpler than we think." The room fell silent. A soft scraping of a chair echoed. Chloe West, Victoria's own student, stood, her voice shaking. "Professor, I think Mr. Thorne is right. The convex structure really does simplify the problem." Jared Lawson added, "I agree. This is not a gap. It's a deeper perspective." Victoria looked around. Her students, her colleagues, the audience, everyone was leaving her side. Dr. Vance stepped to the podium. "The judges will need 20 minutes for independent verification." The auditorium descended into breathless silence. 4 professors, Princeton, Caltech, UW, and Vance, gathered around 4 auxiliary boards to examine Marcus's proof. Every symbol was rewritten, every inference retraced, every step scrutinized as if panning for gold. The live stream surpassed 150,000 viewers. The global mathematics community held its breath. Victoria sat in a corner, her hands clasped so tightly they'd turned white. Julian moved to approach her, but she shook her head. She didn't want comfort. She needed to face this. Finally, Vance returned to the microphone. His expression was solemn, but his eyes were bright. Ladies and gentlemen. The entire room leaned forward. Mr. Thorne's solution is complete, rigorous, and... He smiled for the first time in the entire competition. Exceptional. This is one of the most creative and elegant proofs I have seen in my 30 years of doing mathematics. The auditorium erupted. Cheers shook the walls. The live stream exploded. Academic Twitter ignited. Someone shouted, "When's the wedding, Professor Sterling?" The whole hall roared with laughter. Victoria buried her face in her hands, crimson. Marcus stepped to the microphone. Not proud, not mocking, just dignified. Today reminds us that intelligence can come from anywhere, that simple paths can lead to the deepest truths, and that we should look beyond what our eyes can see. He glanced toward Victoria, not with spite, but with understanding. Mathematics brought us together today. I hope it continues to do so, beyond boundaries and beyond prejudice. And just like that, he didn't only win the competition. He won the intellect. He won against prejudice. He even won the heart of the person who once saw him as the lowest of the low. As the applause was still thundering across the auditorium, Dr. Vance rose and walked to the main microphone. With just a slight lift of his hand, the noise faded, a reaction only someone with true authority could command. "Before we conclude," Vance said, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of something profoundly significant, "I have a disclosure to make." The entire hall dropped into a thick, palpable silence. Victoria lifted her head from her near collapse, her eyes widening as if sensing that another tidal wave was about to hit. "Throughout this competition, I've been haunted by a certain familiarity in the way Mr. Thorne does mathematics," Vance continued. "His approach, his subtle pathways, the elegance of his reasoning. They all reminded me of someone I once supervised." He turned to Marcus, his gaze striking him like a confirmation. "I have remembered. Marcus Thorne was one of my most outstanding PhD candidates at MIT." The sentence hit the auditorium like lightning splitting the sky. Several people gasped. Victoria instantly went pale, blood draining from her face. Vance opened an electronic record and went on, his voice sharp but never cruel. Mr. Thorne completed all doctoral coursework with the highest marks. He passed his qualifying exam, cleared his preliminary dissertation review under my supervision, published 3 papers in top journals, earned the prestigious Sloan Fellowship, and held a GPA of 4.0. A heavy silence fell. Not a silence of doubt, but of shock. Victoria froze. Each sentence was a blade reminding her that she had publicly humiliated someone whose accomplishments outranked her own. Vance continued, his voice softening, infused with humanity. "Mr. Thorne left the program in his final year because his daughter required treatment for a heart condition. He chose to be a father over being an academic. His departure was a tremendous loss to our department." A wave of emotion rippled across the room. Then came the outrage, not directed at Marcus, but at the system that allowed a PhD-level mathematician to work as a janitor for 10 years. On the live stream, comments blew up. "Oh my God, unbelievable. This system is truly broken." Meanwhile, Marcus's phone began vibrating non-stop. MIT sent an immediate admission offer with full funding. Stanford, Princeton, and Berkeley all followed within minutes. Evelyn Frost, the billionaire and chair of the board, stood up, her razor-sharp gaze cutting across the room. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice deep and decisive, the tone of someone accustomed to making monumental decisions. "I will cover all medical expenses for your daughter's heart surgery." But she wasn't finished. "I will also establish the Thorne Fellowship worth $10 million to support university staff who are overlooked yet possess academic ambition, just like you." A third wave of applause erupted. Not polite applause, but the kind that lifted the entire room to its feet. The camera slowly turned toward Victoria. Her face was blank. Pain, shame, and disbelief braided into one expression. She had once believed she stood at the peak of the academic hierarchy. She had once believed Marcus was a reckless outsider. Now she understood. She had fought to destroy someone more gifted than her in every measurable way. And ironically, she had once promised to marry him if he solved the problem. A spiteful joke now turned into a national punchline. The live stream burst into flames. "Ma'am, time to keep your promise. That plot twist hits hard. So, are y'all getting married or what?" Victoria felt the ground drop out beneath her feet. Amid the uproar, people forgot something crucial. Victoria still hadn't spoken a word. Everyone turned toward her. The once proud professor, the woman who had weaponized her authority to humiliate Marcus, the architect of a competition engineered to break him. Now she had to face the truth. She hadn't just misjudged a man. She had gone up against a genius far beyond even her own expectations. The auditorium, the live stream, the international mathematical community, all waited for the final question. What would Victoria Sterling say to the man she once sought to tear down? An apology? An explanation? Or something entirely different? The conclusion of their intellectual and emotional collision was only just beginning. Hours later, the once noisy auditorium now held only 2 people. Victoria sat silently in the front row, her eyes fixed on the whiteboards where her entire worldview had been dismantled piece by piece. The lines of the proof were still there, calm, exact, and shining in a way her own blinding pride had prevented her from seeing. In the vast, cathedral-quiet space, Marcus approached. He was still wearing his janitor uniform, even though his phone hadn't stopped buzzing with prestigious offers from MIT, Stanford, and Yale. "Victoria," he said softly, calling her by name for the first time. Victoria lifted her head. Her eyes were wet. "I owe you more than an apology," she said, her voice trembling. "I owe you recognition. I owe you the right perspective of who you truly are, and I have to admit who I became in the process of trying to tear you down." Her voice tightened. "I let prejudice blind me to the truth. I am ashamed of every insult and every action I took against you." Marcus sat beside her. No anger, no bitterness, only the calm of someone who had endured too much loss to cling to old wounds. "Victoria," he said, "many people judge by appearances, but not everyone has the courage to look back at themselves." A deep silence, not tense, but opening. "As for my ridiculous proposal," Victoria whispered, her face burning with embarrassment. Marcus smiled. A real smile, the first he'd ever given her. "So, are you retracting the offer?" Victoria looked straight at him for the first time without a trace of arrogance in her eyes. "If you're willing to get to know the real me, not the prejudiced professor but the woman who just learned a very hard lesson, I'd like to invite you to dinner, as equals." "I'd like that," Marcus replied. "I think we both still have a lot to learn about each other." In that quiet moment, they both felt something shift. Not lightning bolt love, not a fairy tale, but a beginning built on respect, intellect, and genuine equality. 6 months passed. The university buzzed with headlines. Dr. Marcus Thorne returns to MIT to complete PhD as visiting scholar. Professor Sterling establishes Thorne Fellowship for Overlooked Talent. Maya Thorne's heart surgery successful. The campus lit up whenever Marcus and Victoria walked together, not as janitor and professor, but as colleagues, friends, and perhaps in time, something more. Their relationship blossomed naturally, gently. Not a sugary romance, but a connection forged through intellect, challenge, and mutual respect. They debated, they learned, they supported one another, and they grew. But their story did something far bigger. It ignited a movement. Across social media, people began sharing stories of hidden talent behind ordinary uniforms. A cook who had once been an engineer, an Uber driver with a law degree, a security guard who used to be a novelist. The country began asking, how many brilliant minds are we wasting? One morning, Dr. Sarah Chen, Maya's cardiologist, called. The surgery was a success. Her heart has recovered beautifully. She can live a completely normal life. Marcus froze for a second before tears filled his eyes. When he lifted Maya into his arms, both father and daughter cried, not from fear anymore, but from relief and pure hope. "Daddy won, right?" Maya asked, her voice tiny but happy. Marcus squeezed her gently. "Not just me, us, all of us won." Victoria stood in the doorway, watching quietly, her heart tightening with a different kind of emotion. For the first time in years, she understood. Prestige does not define worth. The human heart does. Intelligence doesn't wear a uniform, talent doesn't need lineage, and love never obeys society's hierarchy. Ask yourself today, how many extraordinary people did you overlook because of the job they do? Do you truly look at the people who make your coffee, who clean your buildings, who stand in the background of your life? Do you hear their stories? Because maybe the person you least expect is the person you most need to know. If this story made you think, share it. If it restored your faith in people, leave a comment. And if you've ever been underestimated, tell us your story. If you enjoy stories like this, stories that remind us that extraordinary things often hide in the most ordinary places, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We have many more journeys to share, stories of kindness, intelligence, and the comebacks that warm the heart. See you in the next video.